What's up guys? Golden Knight here. If there's one thing almost every artist has experienced, it's that frustration of trying to draw the human body and realizing the head turned out too big or too small, the torso looks like a square, one arm is longer than the other, etc. We look at the drawings of the artists we admire and think, man, how do these people make the body look so natural? Maybe I just don't have the talent for this. But the problem is never a lack of talent. Well, almost never. It's more a matter of studying the wrong way. Most artists learn anatomy the hardest way possible, trying to memorize the names of muscles, bones, exact proportions, as if they were studying for a medical exam, and that's absolutely unnecessary. Knowing the name of the muscle that moves your left ring finger sideways will only serve to impress your mom or grandma, who'll think you're super intellectual. Maybe. Today we're going to talk about a much faster and more efficient path to learning anatomy for artists. The idea here is to cover 7 fundamental points. 7 mindset and practice shifts that, together, completely transform the way you study and apply anatomy in your drawing. By the way, I have to say, I've been taking the art school for digital artists by Mark Brunette, and honestly, I've never learned so much in such a short time. It's a super complete course, like a condensed art school, focused only on what really matters. Perspective, anatomy, composition, all explained really well. If you want to level up fast, this is the way. Check the first link in the description. Totally worth it. Stop memorizing and start understanding the forms. As we've said, most people believe that studying anatomy means memorizing muscles. Biceps, triceps, deltoid, sternocleidomastoid. It's exhausting just to hear. The problem isn't the names themselves, but the approach. When you try to memorize details before understanding the whole, when it's time to draw, you might know that muscle exists, but you don't know how to use it. Experienced artists think in a completely different way. They don't start with individual muscles. They start with forms. Because the human body, before being a set of muscles, is a set of volumes in space. Boxes, cylinders, spheres, rotating planes. Think of an arm, for example. If you try to draw it by focusing on each muscle right away, your arm will most likely end up looking off, lacking volume. But if you see that arm as 2 cylinders connected by a sphere at the elbow, everything changes. You understand where it bends, how it rotates, how it occupies space. This kind of thinking, applied to any other form you draw, is infinitely more useful than memorizing names. In fact, this skill of simplifying shapes and rotating them in space is essential for those who like the idea of drawing without using references, but that's a topic for another video. Study movement, not static photos. Now that you understand that the body is made of simple shapes in space, here comes the next breakthrough. The human body wasn't made to stay still. It exists in motion. Even when someone is still, there's still balance, tension, weight distribution, slight tilts, perspective. And that's exactly what most drawings lose when the artist focuses only on those classic art course exercises, drawing the character from the front, from the side, etc. When you draw only from static images, your brain switches to contour copy mode. You start reproducing outer lines without understanding what's happening inside. The result might even look right at first glance, but something always feels off. The drawing ends up stiff, lifeless, like a puppet frozen in time. That's why so many artists talk about gesture. Gesture isn't about detail or perfect proportion. It's about understanding how the body works. It's about capturing the core idea of the pose. It's about understanding where the body is going, where the weight is, what part leads the movement. It's essential that artists who are beginning to learn anatomy also train gesture alongside. This will speed up the process tremendously. I wish I had discovered this kind of exercise years ago when I studied anatomy in a stiff and rigid way. Classic, and extremely efficient, exercise is doing quick 30-second poses or even less. Kind of like what I do here in my videos, almost always. In that amount of time, you simply can't draw details, and that's great. You're forced to focus on the essentials. Where's the weight? Which leg supports the body? Is the torso tilted? Is the movement more curved or more straight? Every line needs to have intent, because there's no time to go back. In the beginning, these drawings will look awful. And they will be. Loose lines, weird proportions, nearly abstract figures. A lot of people give up here, thinking, I'm not learning anything. But it's exactly the opposite. This type of study trains your brain to see the body as a single, connected system. Over time, you start noticing patterns. How the pelvis always reacts to the movement of the torso, how the shoulders compensate for the weight of the legs, and so on. This is the same principle used by animators, whose job is to simulate motion through static drawings. Before any character gets detailed, it starts as gesture, a simple silhouette full of fluidity. Because if the movement works without details, it will work with any level of finish. Use references seriously. Many artists try to draw from imagination too early. They sit down to draw a complex pose, a character in action, and when the result doesn't work, the conclusion is always the same: I suck. But the problem isn't lack of skill. It's lack of visual information. Drawing without reference, when you haven't built a solid visual vocabulary, is like trying to speak a language you've never heard. You might guess a few words, but the odds of saying something coherent are minimal. Reference isn't cheating. Every professional artist uses reference. The difference is in how they use it. The purpose of a reference isn't to copy a photo, which also has its uses, but for a different goal. Using references is about answering the questions that come up during the drawing process. When you look at a reference with intention, you start noticing details: how the shoulder lifts when the arm raises, how the ribcage rotates when the body twists, how the pelvis tilts on a supporting leg. And the more you train this eye for patterns, the more those answers begin to appear automatically in your drawing. Using real-life references makes all the difference. Photos of real people, slow-motion videos, rotatable 3D models. 3D models are powerful allies, especially for understanding rotation and volume. When you rotate the model, you notice things a flat photo hides. Over time, even when you're not drawing, your brain starts recording patterns. People walking down the street, movie characters, action scenes in games, everything becomes study material. And when you return to your sketchbook, that information flows almost effortlessly. It's like you're always studying, even when you're not technically drawing. Stay alert, because this idea of drawing from imagination is insanely common online. It's a promise that sells a lot, and it's a trap. That's because it touches a real pain point for beginner artists who don't yet realize that the most amazing artists they admire use reference all the time. Learn proportions through construction, not rulers. When it comes to proportion, many people think of those classic 7 heads, 8 heads, measured lines, rigid comparisons. That might work as an initial learning tool, but it becomes a problem when the artist starts treating proportion as exact math. The human body doesn't work like a store-bought mannequin. It bends, compresses, stretches, and changes all the time. When you build the body using basic forms, you begin to notice that leg length isn't fixed. It changes with perspective. That the torso can look shorter or longer depending on tilt. That the head can look bigger or smaller depending on how close or far the imaginary camera is. All of this is dynamic proportion, not a rigid rule, not a precise measurement. A very effective exercise is to exaggerate. Draw poses with extreme tilts, weird angles. When you go back to simpler poses, your control improves dramatically. Another key point: variety. If you always draw ideal bodies, all the same height, same width, same posture, your sense of proportion stays limited. Observe different people. Tall, short, thin, fat, relaxed, tense. Every body has its own features defined by unique genetics. The construction adapts to each type, but the logic stays the same. I really like prioritizing real-world references, but for these more exaggerated exercises, references from great comic artists, manga, and splash art help a lot. Study the major muscle groups first. Here's one of the biggest shortcuts in artistic anatomy, and also one of the most ignored. You don't need, and shouldn't, try to learn every muscle in the human body at once. That's a recipe for confusion and burnout. What really changes your drawing are just a few key muscles. They define the overall volume, silhouette, and how the figure reads from a distance. When someone looks at a body, their eyes don't pick out small complex muscles. They perceive masses. The chest and lats create the feeling of width in the torso. The deltoid defines how the arm connects to the torso. The biceps-triceps combo gives the arm thickness. These and other large groups are responsible for nearly everything that works visually in anatomy. You need to understand the external shape that the muscle creates, where it adds volume, where it narrows, how it changes when stretched or contracted. In other words, how it affects the silhouette. Focus on one muscle group at a time. Just one. For example, deltoid. Observe references, check out 3D models, do small sketches of that muscle in various angles and positions. No rush. Then apply it in a simple character. Don't try to fit in all the muscles at once. Over time, you'll realize that many muscles work together and form larger masses. And that's what you're really drawing: Connected volumes. That's the moment when anatomy starts to click. Draw from memory to reinforce knowledge. Wait, didn't you just say to always use references? Stay calm. Hear me out. When you draw with reference, your brain enters a comfortable mode. The answer is right there. But when you close the image and try drawing from memory, the brain has to reconstruct the information. It has to search your mental visual library for the information and decide what's essential, what makes sense, how the parts connect. This is a highly effective way to lock in anything you're learning. So, yes, it's an excellent study method. Pick a reference. Study it for a few minutes. Observe the main shapes, volumes, the gesture. Then close the image and draw the same pose from memory. No peeking. When you finish, compare both drawings. Where did you go wrong? Is the arm too short? Did the torso lose its tilt? Does the character look like they're floating? These answers will help you immensely in your next drawings. After that, fix it. Do a third drawing, this time with the reference again, correcting what was wrong. This cycle of observing, remembering, failing, and correcting accelerates learning like crazy. In just a few weeks, you'll notice certain structures stick in your mind. They just show up when you draw. Over time, you'll rely less and less on reference for basic things. Not because you're a genius, but because you've built visual memory. Make anatomy a habit, not a phase. A lot of people treat anatomy like a project with a beginning, middle, and end. Something like, I'm going to study anatomy for 3 months and that's it. But anatomy doesn't work like that. The artists who truly improve aren't the ones who study intensely for a short period. They're the ones who study consistently. Every great artist returns to anatomy studies from time to time when they feel the need. When it comes to gesture drawing, even 15 to 30 minutes a day makes a huge difference. The secret isn't duration, it's frequency. When it becomes a habit, studying stops being an obligation and becomes part of your creative process. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.